If Pyros and Crips all got along, they probably gun me down by the end of the song. Seem like the whole city go against me. Every time I'm in the street, I hear
Axberka draft videos.
Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Axberka Draft Video. This is episode number 2, the first Q&A video. And before we go ahead and get started, I thought I'd just go ahead and address kind of what these episodes are going to be about. I know last episode I said that these would be the Q&A videos, but I'm going to go ahead and change that. I'm going to change that to basically anything that I want to talk about regarding the draft, or just regarding footballs. Maybe I talk about schemes. Maybe I talk about one specific prospect and break their film down. Maybe I talk about my big board. Maybe I talk about my mock draft. I definitely think that this is going to be a way that, you know, it makes it a little bit easier on me. It doesn't kind of restrict the format of my videos. And going forward, I think that that's what we're going to go ahead and keep this out. So let's go ahead and jump into it. The first question comes from Charlie. Dude is a guy on Reddit. He basically, the dude's a machine. That guy is a guy's a monster. You know, me and him really don't agree on a lot of stuff, but he doesn't stop. If you don't know who he is, go and check him out. His name is Charlie Man with like 17 N's at the end. His question is, would you rather have a more polished player but less athletic, or less polished but more athletic? All right, and my answer to that question is, it kind of honestly, it depends on the position. So I'm going to go ahead and just go position by position, and we're also going to assume that everything else is equal, right? So same height, same weight, same background, same scheme that they came from, all that. And I was kind of going over all this, and you know, I just kind of noticed that I would pretty much, for almost every single position, prefer more polished when I went through it. So I'm just going to go position by position. Quarterback, I'm going to say more polished, worse athlete. If you look at the best quarterbacks of all time, they weren't really all that athletic. Obviously, some of them are more athletic than others, but for the most part, you look at, you know, Joe Montana, dude is known for passing. Look at Tom Brady, known for passing. Pretty sure he's still running the 40 to this day. You know, you look at Ben Roethlisberger, the dude's like 500 pounds. Dan Marino, you look at, obviously, you know, some of these guys are more athletic than others, but for the most part, their passing is what they built their career on. I would much rather have a more polished passer than a better athlete at the quarterback position. Running back, I would rather have more polished, worse athlete. And the reason I say that is, personally, and I'm going to address this later on in one of the other questions, but I like bigger backs. And obviously having a big back who is also athletic is preferable, but the question is one or the other. And if I'm being honest, I would rather have a more polished, because, and I'm also going to address the vision aspect of running backs here in just a little bit, but if a running back is more polished than athletic, at least they can get 5 yards. If they're more athletic than polished, most of the time they probably won't even be picking up 5 yards. So there's my thoughts on that. Wide receiver, this one was tough. I said more polished, worse athlete. And the reason I say that is, you look at a guy like Jerry Rice. He ran what, like a 4.74 in the 40? Obviously, that's the exception to the rule, but still, if a wide receiver can get separation with their agility rather than just their pure athleticism, then I would rather have that than a guy who strictly relies on his athleticism. And also the next one was tackle. I skipped over tight end. Tight end is that one strictly depends on your scheme. If you're a team like New England, you either have more athletic. If you're a team that basically runs the ball every single down, you would rather have a more polished tight end, you know, one that's a better blocker. So then now we're going to go on to tackles. I would rather have more polished, pretty much for the entire offensive line except for guard. I would rather have more polished. If you're a tackle or a center and you're a better athlete, that really doesn't do you any good, because most of the time you're not going to be running downfield except on those special occasions where basically you are. You know, it seems like once or twice a game, if that. For the most part, you're going to be in the pocket. It doesn't really matter if you're a better athlete. Now, guards, obviously, guards pull, guards are often the ones that are taking out linebackers. I would rather have a more athletic guard than a more polished guard. That's just me. Just for the simple fact that you can kind of switch up the scheme of your offensive line, in that you can pull guards, you can have those guys coming out to block on pitch plays and block on sweeps, off tackle runs, things of that nature. 3-4 defensive end, I said more polished, because for the most part, 3-4 defensive ends aren't asked to rush the passer. You know, they're not asked to do all that. They're mainly asked to set the edge and to basically defend the run. So I would rather have a more polished 3-4 defensive end than an athletic defensive end in the 3-4 scheme. But when it comes to 4-3 defensive end, I would rather have a more athletic, because obviously pass rush. pass rushing is the most important aspect to any, honestly, to any defense. If you don't have a pass rush, you're most likely not going to have a very stellar defense. Obviously, you can have a very good defense without having a pass rush, but it's going to be extremely difficult to have a good defense without. And then the same goes for 3-4 edge rusher. Same aspect. You want guys who can get after the quarterback. Doesn't matter if your guy is polished. If you have a 4-3 defensive end, doesn't matter if he's the most polished guy in the world. If he's not fast enough to get to the quarterback in 3 to 4 seconds, then it's all for nothing. And that's basically my thoughts on that. And then the rest of the positions: outside linebacker, more polished; inside linebacker, more polished; cornerback, more polished. That one was a difficult one. But you look at a guy like Richard Sherman in the right scheme, they can be a lot more effective than the opposite. If you have a guy like Richard Sherman who's not as athletic but more polished, well, then you can at least still press guys at the line. You can still mix up your scheme. But if you're a guy who's more athletic but not nearly as polished, it doesn't really matter what scheme you're in, because it's not going to really, you guys are still going to be beating you left and right. And then the same goes for safety. Both of those were really difficult. If you're a corner or a safety, it doesn't matter how athletic you are if you don't have the technique. All right, so that's pretty much my thoughts on that. And then we go to the next question. It's going to be, do you prefer a big running back, a small shifty running back, or a jack of all trades running back? And this one took me a little bit to kind of flesh out my thoughts on. Right, so I'm going to answer this in 2 questions. And again, we're going to assume all things equal as far as background, production in college, all that good stuff. So I'm going to answer this in 2 questions. I have number 1. I prefer big backs just for the simple fact that they can get 3 to 4 yards a pop consistently, and they can also come in on the goal line. It allows you to be a little bit more flexible as far as what you're doing. So if you have a small back in that regard, you have to have another running back to supplement the small running back. So having a big running back, you can bring them in on first, second, third down. You can have them block. You can have them on the goal line. It doesn't force you to have extra players that you wouldn't necessarily have to if you had a big running back. All right, and then the second part to that question is a little bit more philosophical, a little more schematic as far as my opinion on that. So the NFL today has adjusted to the passing way, basically. Teams like the Panthers, who drafted Shaq Lawson to play linebacker, or how Belichick, recently he made comments basically that teams are putting safeties at linebackers. And that just all goes to show how prominent the passing is in the NFL today. With all these teams going to different schemes and everything like that, having a guy like Shaq Lawson at linebacker, putting safeties at linebackers, that makes those teams very susceptible to a big running back, like a Le'Veon Bell, LeGarrette Blount. So, not only that, it also puts the defense in a bit of conundrum, depending on the kind of scheme that you run as an offense. And what I mean by that is let's say an offense goes 3 wide, 1 tight end, and 1 big running back. Whereas if you had let's just have that picture in your mind, and then also picture if you had a small running back. Would you feel more comfortable with that kind of a formation, with a big running back or with a small running back? I would feel more comfortable with a big running back, because basically that puts a defense in position where how are you going to defend that? So let's just say, again, you go 3 wide, 1 tight end, 1 running back. And let's assume that we're talking about having a small shifty running back. If a defense puts 4 down, 2 linebackers, 5 in the back end, that allows them to cover that small shifty running back with a safety or a corner. Whereas if you had a big running back, how are they going to defend that? Let's say that they do, again, put 4 down, 2 linebackers, 5 in the back end to defend the pass. Well, then you can go ahead and run an inside run or inside trap with that big running back, have him take out one of those linebackers and pick up 9-10 yards. All right, but then let's say that, they have the big running back. Let's go ahead and put, let's say they go 4 down, 3 linebackers, and 4 in the back. Well, then that leaves one-on-one opportunities with the wide receivers and the tight end. You can go play action. You can go a lot of different ways with that kind of a scheme with the big running back. Whereas if you have a small shifty running back, they can keep those 2 linebackers on the field and not really have to worry about that small running back basically running over one of those safety linebackers that they have out back there. So those are my thoughts on that. Having a big running back just adds so much more to an offense, as far as what you can do schematically, because you can have that kind of 2 parts to your offense. You can have the 4 wide receivers and with 1 running back. Whereas if you had a small shifty back, they really wouldn't put the defense in a conundrum, because they would already have their sub package out there. They would already have their defense to cover the pass with that small shifty running back. That's basically how I feel about that. And then we're going to go to our last question here. that question is, what's the most important aspect of a running back? And I was kind of going over all this. I was kind of thinking about how I'm going to answer this question all throughout the week. And I think I have a pretty good answer here. And my answer is going to be I'm going to go with vision. Because nothing else really honestly matters if you don't have a guy can run a 4.2 40. You know, he can run a 4.1 if he wants to. It doesn't really matter if you can't get past the line of scrimmage. And then also conversely, you can be a big running back. You know, you could be 250 pounds running a 4.2. Yeah, that's all nice and good. But then the defense can just focus on passing downs because you aren't going to be getting anywhere if you run the ball with that running back because they won't be getting past the line of scrimmage. Basically, the way I see it is vision is the flour to a cake. And what I mean by that, I know it's kind of a little bit of a weird comparison, but hear me out. Some running backs can be the frosting to a cake. Some guys can have the eggs. Other guys can have, baking soda, frosting, and milk. They can have almost everything that you need. But if a guy doesn't have flour, it doesn't really matter what you have if you don't have the flour when you're baking a cake. Right? It's just going to come out as shit, no matter what. So basically, vision gets you from point A to point B. Everything else is going to get you to point C. So it's just this all giant mixing pot. One guy can have one thing, but it doesn't really matter if he doesn't have the main ingredient to whatever you want. So that's basically how I feel about that. So that's pretty much episode number 2 of Axberka Draft Video. I'll leave some links in the description of where you can hit me up. And I'll go ahead and see you guys next week. I'm going to be scouting some running backs. I'm going to be scouting Leonard Fournette, Nick Chubb, and Dalvin Cook. So keep an eye out for that. Anyway, keep an eye out for that stuff. And thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.